Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the employability track of this year's Ashesi Education Collaborative in partnership with Kepler. My name is Sylvia Kunchebe, and I work with the MasterCard Foundation, leading school-to-work transitions for the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program. And it is an honor for me to be your co-moderator for this session today. For the next couple of hours, we will be looking at redefining effective career development systems in higher education institutions in Africa, and we'll be focusing on aligning the focus of education in higher education institutions on labor market needs. So we want to find out, how do higher education institutions create sustainable and adaptable systems that offer students optimal career development and a high employment outcome? I think for me here, the key words are sustainable and adaptive, because the world is changing, especially the world of work. So we need to be adaptive, and whatever we do today should be sustainable in future years. So we would use this conversation today to delve deeper into those. So now, why Africa, right? If we've not been living under rocks for the past couple of years, we will all have read one report or the other on employability skills, future of work, skills that job seekers need to have. There are a lot of resources, research materials on these skills. The World Economic Forum, ILO, IFC, McKinsey, these are some of the organizations that have taken the lead in this kind of research over the years, and they consistently release such data. But we want to know, do these figures, data, correspond to the African context? And we also know that while most parts of the world are well advanced when it comes to their economy and the players in their economies, and whereas they are able to, offer opportunities in sectors such as big data, machine learning, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and all these other sectors that have been touted as the future of work and skills that young people need to have now, those skills are not necessarily very well developed in many of our economies of the continent. And so we often find that graduates who would have graduated from these courses will find it difficult to find employment on the continent. So for that simple fact, right, the fact that our African economies are structured differently, the players in our economy are operating on different wavelengths, we want to understand what is essential for the African context, and how our African higher institution aligned with African labor market needs currently in our current context, and what we should be looking at in terms of gaps in the foreseeable future, because we believe our economies will grow. So how should our education be responding to the future needs of industry? We're also looking to project into the future and prepare for that. And thirdly, we will also be discussing the issue of the seeming disconnect between labor markets and higher education institutions. We've heard the story of this disconnect over the years. We want to know what exactly is happening, right? Because we do have our education institutions on the continent are able to produce some of the most amazing talent in industry across the world, right? So where is the exact disconnect when it comes to industry on the continent and the graduates that are being produced? And to look at this, we'll be looking at three major areas. So technical skills, which is everything that has to do with subject matter competence. And increasingly now, we're going to also delve into technology and digital skills as part of technical skills. Then we'll be looking at transferable skills, all the skills that young people gain from experiences in and out of the classroom, internships, extracurricular, travel, all of those experiences that they bring onto a job that helps them build the soft skills that they need to come into a job. And then lastly, we'll look at productivity skills as well, right? From my introduction, you would realize that it is really very clear that education cannot do this alone. We definitely need industry to be participants in this discussion. And as such, to discuss this topic, I have three seasoned experts who straddle the various aspects of this conversation and who are going to help me shed more light on connecting higher education institutions to the job market. So without further ado, I will go ahead to introduce our panelists for today's session. Now, our first panelist is Dr. Bernard Saka, and he is Cameroonian and an award-winning social entrepreneur, employability skills developer, youth and women empowerment coach, and an international consultant. He holds a PhD in governance and regional integration, among a plethora of other professional and academic certifications. Dr. Saka is a founder, shareholder, manager, and consultant for several social enterprises and corporate entities, with over 10 years track record and accumulated professional experiences from diverse domains, including civil society and the corporate world. He's successfully trained more than 13,000 young women from different professional backgrounds, many of whom have gone ahead to create businesses, to become self-employed, and are in highly remunerated jobs locally and internationally. He's also well renowned for his advocacy and lobbying efforts in Cameroon, some of which have highly shaped the employment policies, programs, and working conditions for many unemployed youth whose situations have been further compounded by the prevailing socioeconomic and political crisis in Cameroon. Dr. Saka remains particularly committed to issues related to professional skills development, women empowerment, and sound corporate governance in Cameroon and in Africa in general. And so you'd realize he comes with a wealth of experience, especially in the social enterprise, community development, and NGO field. So welcome, Dr. Saka. Our next panelist is Bernie Conyers, and Bernie is the Supply Chain Director for Fast Moving Consumer Goods at Unilever Ghana. So he, comes into this with experience creating strategies and leading the execution of global supply chain activities, delivering positive outcomes with strong and sustainable gains. Bernie brings over 18 years of management and global supply chain experience and has driven operational improvements in the manufacturing and supply chain sectors. He has also held a variety of leadership positions throughout his career, including being a production supervisor, SAP Make Lead, Supply Chain Corporate Audit Manager, Manufacturing Excellence Director, and his most recent role as Supply Chain Director in Ghana. Bernie holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Northwestern University in the United States. So Bernie brings that, industry side of to the conversation, as well as, working for an organization that not only operates on the continent, but is actively, engaged worldwide. And so that perspective of juxtaposing the African, education with education of the continent, as well as students produced from these two kinds of education. So welcome, Bernie. Our final panelist is Prof. Bailey Yeshita, and Prof. Bailey is the Vice Chancellor of Kepler in Rwanda. He's passionate on advancing a conducive environment for learning and innovation. He's a champion of graduate employment issues in the region. Before joining Kepler, he was a president of Bahir Dar University, one of the largest universities in Ethiopia, for 7 years. He led the establishment of many graduate programs and a new medical school with a comprehensive university hospital, which led Bahir Dar University to become one of the leading research universities in the region. He has also served as a board member on several federal, regional, government, and non-governmental institutions in Ethiopia. His educational background includes PhD in space physics from the University of Oulu in Finland, MS in space physics from the University of Tromsø, I hope I'm getting this right, from the University of Tromsø in Norway, and BSc in physics from Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. He has more than 45 scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals. So, ladies and gentlemen, Prof. Bailey, who brings the perspective of higher education institutions and academia into this conversation. I'll like to jump right into the conversations and start with the panel discussion for today. And I will want to start with you, Bernie, as someone representing industry and manufacturing and a multinational organization. I want to find out from you what in the African context and working in Africa, what are those desirable competencies that you're looking out for in new graduates who are looking to work with Unilever or work with any of the multinationals that we have operating on the continent? What do you look out for?
Okay, the first is practical experience. As they're finishing university, hopefully they've done some internship, spent some time in the consumer good or some other oil and gas industry, so they can take the academia elements of the career and apply it in the field. Then I would say there would be the basics around where not Microsoft, Word, Excel, Power BI, etc. And then it's the communication skills coming from the students and their ability to articulate their ideas, the improvements that they want to drive, and also their integration into the workforce. So I will start there. I can get into many more other elements, but I'll pause at that point.
All right. So for you, practical experience was first on the list, right? So regardless of what you studied on your degree and your GPA, you require that practical experience first of all. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's definitely preferred because if I take the basis of what's needed to make soap, a lot of this you may not learn in the classroom. And so if you've seen other soap making machines or you've seen other industrial equipment, when you come into the likes of a Unilever or Nestle or P&G or any of the other companies, you'll be able to relate to it a bit. So that firsthand experience. When I think back over 20 years ago, my first time in a factory was a huge eye opener for me. So it made it a lot easier for me to go into other jobs and other functions. I'm having that practical experience out of university.
All right. Thanks for that, Bernie. Dr. Sak, I'm wondering, in your field and community organizations, NGO, social enterprise, what are you looking for? Do you identify with the skills Bernie has outlined? Are there things that you look out for specifically because of the kind of work that you do?
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. And I'd like to add to Benny's submission because at our level, first, we need problem-solving skills. We need leadership skills. We also need project management skills because our community work, NGO work, is more about projects. And so we want, these skills that can readily address the problems that we're trying to address in the community. And of course, we need also report writing skills because all what we do has to obviously be properly reported. And this cannot go without good communication skills. And this also would be with respect to the context that we're dealing with. I take the case of Cameroon. You bear with me that we have, these language challenges and all of that. But then what is important is being able to master and communicate and articulate not just the projects, the reports of what you're doing, but also to be able to create that kind of impact in communities that reflects the kind of work that we do. And of course, you also need, interpersonal skills because community work is all about, meeting people and also being able to engage them. And this cannot go if you do not have very good, if not excellent, interpersonal skills. So these are some of those that we readily look for in the volunteers and also persons that we get to work with in this space. So sometimes also you see that it's true they may not necessarily have all of this at a go, but some of those that I've highlighted and including computer skills really get to be very, very important from the start, while we also work with you to develop other skills already in this space.
So, from the two of you, basically, computing skills is an important one. Communication, you've both mentioned that. Communication as well, you've mentioned that. And I heard recently from an employer that when it comes to recruitment and pitching a student that went to, had their university education on the continent in Africa and one that had their education abroad, that you would have to do extra with the students from the continent, even though they're both Africans, to get their IT skills up there. So basically, the complaint was our education doesn't allow students to use Word and Excel and emailing, simple things like emailing. And so they would come into the workplace and not have those skills and not be able to use those. And so just because of that difference alone, it makes it easier, more convenient to hire somebody who's from Africa but has been educated abroad. And I'm wondering, what kind of competencies are you struggling to find? This is just, one example. I don't even know if that applies to your fields as well. But if it does, you can shed some light on it. But aside the computing skills, you've mentioned communication, having that just the practical industry experience, project management, leadership. You've mentioned problem solving, and even skills like report writing, which students do in schools. I'm wondering which of these are most difficult for you to find, even though they look like they're given.
From my perspective, it's interesting. I feel a lot of skills are teachable, if the student is willing to learn. It's also one of those elements of if you have someone that has studied abroad, yes, it's probably easier to integrate that person because their environment abroad is going to expose them to a lot of things that they may have not been exposed in an African university. But at the same time, you will have to invest a bit of energy into someone who has not studied abroad. But in most cases, it's a matter of 3-6 months and the person's up to speed. Now, what I find interesting is that if I take just the basis of Google, you can learn almost anything you want to learn there. And really, if the students are willing to say, hey, I have a gap and I'm willing to close that gap, and they'll use whatever resource that's there. Back for me in the day, it was a library. Today is Google. Then I don't see it as a problem. But to specifically answer your question, I would say that the hardest skill to teach is probably in my industry is about maintenance and preventive maintenance, and technically understanding how machines work, and that's something that you don't really learn in school, and you learn a bit around your environment. So that for me has been the biggest struggle. On the report writing, presentation, etc. At least in the corporates, you have so many opportunities to learn and practice. That development will come from there. So I would say it's the mechanical hands-on element to engage with equipment, to ensure it's running properly, to ensure that the quality and the efficiencies are there, and the confidence for an individual to say, hey, I'm going to own this equipment and make sure it never fails.
All right. Lillian, I see your hand is up. Let's go to Dr. Saka, and then you can ask your question, Lillian.
Yes, Sylvia, I think just to add that this is actually a question of digital divide. And when you look at some of those hardly, skills that we really are looking forward to, but rarely do find, especially with our own African graduates, you see that, of course, when you study in an environment like maybe some of the Western context where you have, this digital infrastructure, and you have the facilities and access really to the internet and all of those, you do acquire quite, a good number of skills, which may not be the case in our African context. And unfortunately, you find out that in our context, we have rather more graduates with the certificate, in even computing, data analysis, and all of that. But in terms of practice, you don't get to find that. But just like Bernie said, it's about getting also 3 to 6 months of some practical work, and they're able to translate these concepts or theories into real applicable senses. But then I think for us, again, it's about this project management, because it incorporates quite several dimensions. And you will notice that without good computing skills, especially when it comes to Excel, for instance, you won't be able to handle quite a lot when it comes to projects. So we rarely get to find this, because you have graduates with master's degrees, for instance, in project management, whom we get to recruit, but then you do not find them capable of really handling issues related to projects. To come up with even simple concept notes sometimes is challenging. They cannot report, as well as they cannot monitor or evaluate, projects on ground. But then within few months of maybe accompanying and mentorship and all of maybe the hands-on techniques that we're able to drill them through, they can easily adapt to the new work environment. So basically, it's about also addressing this digital divide, but also looking at the context and the resources we have to accompany the graduates while they are training with, of course, consciousness of the labor market situation in the context where they have to apply such knowledge and competencies.
So, Lillian, before you come in, so for both of you, and this is just to summarize, what I've heard from the two of you, anybody is teachable. That's what I'm hearing, that as long as they're willing to learn, they will be able to learn, and they will be able to grasp the concepts, the things, the technology that they don't know or they haven't been exposed to as part of the education. And then the second part is, you're both stressing engagement with industry, because you both have said, give the person a few months. So you both said, give a fresh student who's willing a few months exposure in industry, and they will be able to learn everything that they need to be successful. So, I mean, for me, the two takeaways for me are industry experience and the willingness to learn on the part of the students. So, Prof. Bailey, I'll be coming to you on that point, right? What I've just summarized, and I'll be coming to you to find out from your perspective as a higher education, someone working in higher education on the continent, the competencies that you are seeking to inculcate in your students, what you want them to acquire by the time they're graduating from your university. If you can speak to that when we come back from Lillian's question. So Lillian, please go ahead and ask your question.
I'm quite excited about this session because it touches on me first as a student who studied in Europe, then came back to work in the continent. So as I listened to the questions, I felt this is a conversation that is very timely. To comment to that, I wanted to comment to that and say, are we really depending a lot from university when, an education system starts from when a child is born? What is happening at home? What is happening in school? I'm a huge advocate for sports and extracurricular activity. Is this what we are not investing in? Because a lot of these skills, you don't learn them in class. You learn them from interacting. And when I look at my time in Europe, one of the things that gave me the courage or, the ambition to do the kind of things I'm doing, it was traveling. It was not the classroom, yeah? So I just want to introduce this new idea of it's not just the classroom, it's not just the universities. What's the community doing? Extracurricular activities, participation from parents. Yeah, so I mean the conversation is too huge to address in one day. My question for employers is, and again I speak about this as someone who runs a firm that is very passionate about helping these young people transit from the workplace, from university to the workplace. At what point are you engaging with universities? Because my continuous assessment of this area is that employers are waiting for this ready-made product. When do you plug in and get this product ready? Is it right at the end? Or is it when they leave high school? Because when they leave high school, they're beginning to think about work. That's the point when, work becomes a reality. They've got pocket money. They're thinking about how do I make this pocket money work? Could I get a job somewhere? And three, I want to throw another question to the employers, which it's quite a big topic as well. I find, the employers have to keep themselves updated on these different generations. I come from Generation Y. Yeah, we have millennials now. So, the conversations we are having now are not the same conversations we're going to have 10 years from today. There's an aspect where employers must think about the different generations coming to the workplace. Yeah, and I think the generation millennial is very unique at the moment, and everyone is talking about them. So those are my comments and my questions to this conversation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lillian, for that. And, like you mentioned, employers definitely do have a role to play, and we can't wait till the end to bring them in. So we will come to employers about, how, at what point they come into this conversation. But before that, let's give Prof. Bailey an opportunity to share from his perspective, having learned from Dr. Bernard and Bernie about what they're expecting, what higher education, in his institution and generally for higher education on the continent, what skills that, they are looking forward to in terms of, students' graduation and their competences.
Thank you very much. I think that Bernie and Dr. Saka have identified key competencies that really drive employment, and many institutions in the continent have also recognized these competencies. We call most of them transferable skills, are increasingly becoming a need from the employer side. So when institutions are designing curriculum, when they are modeling their academic offering, they really try to build a system, a pedagogy that enhance this kind of skills. Some institutions use what they call hidden curriculum. If they are, like, let's say, teaching engineering, the main curriculum is focusing on the machine or on the electronics, but they give students projects-based work, teamwork, so that they can really enhance also their communication, their report writing skill, and their interpersonal skill. So there are these different attempts to add this key skill that really what the employers are looking for. Practically, when you see the labor market in Africa right now, if we see now, according to 2019, the World Bank says 53% are employed in agriculture, 36% in service, 11% in industry. And from industry, 80% production, like Bernie was talking about machine and so on. The production, actually 11% industry employment in Africa is the lowest in the globally. So from that lowest, even like this 11%, 80% production and in a private and small and medium enterprise. So from the challenging part of university, like think about 80% of private, small and medium enterprise dealing with different production. How can you really encode that kind of skill into a curriculum? In terms of especially technical skill, is very challenging. I think that in terms of like this soft skill, transferable skill, our experience at Kepler, focusing on adaptability, self-learning, and digital literacy and communication. These are the core competency we focus. So we try at the entry level, when the student comes from high school, we try to equip the student with these key competencies so that they will succeed not only in their study that's going to come in the senior years, but also for employment. I will stop there.
Thanks, Prof. Bailey, and maybe later you can elaborate on adaptability, because I see George has asked a question on that. But you mentioned that for you, the soft skills are easier to do and inculcate in the curriculum, but technical skills aren't necessarily that easy to do. And I'm wondering why, what is the difficulty with having technical skills infused into the curriculum?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So technical skill has two dimensions. One is like the way we African are exposed in our, I think Lilian was mentioning this kind of outside learning, like in the houses. If you see Western societies, they're in their houses, there is garage, there is machine, there's different tools, the kids are exposed early on to really be comfortable and exposed to different tools to use, like so to say. So whereas in our case, when the student come to the university, you might find someone that has never seen some of these very basic tools to use it in electronic measurement or testing, or in terms of mechanical machine, some tools, that basic tools that you use to change gears or whatsoever. So the incorporating, universities are supposed to teach more of in engineering side of that, and even these technical schools like the polytechnics, it's very hard to build that capacity in a short period of time because of two things. One, there is a limitation in terms of the machine that we have in the laboratories, to train students. Two, I think the nature of the curriculum also needs a lot of work. And third, I think that the collaboration with employers partnering with the training institution to work together.
The employers have the machinery. They have it all in their offices, in their organizations. I want to hear from Bernie and Dr. Saka. In terms of maybe, let's start with you, Bernie, because we've mentioned engineering quite a lot and machinery and all of that. How are you inviting students in? How are you partnering with educational institutions on the continent to sort of, help us bridge some of these gaps we have with tools and equipment and, exposure into industry?
Okay, so I landed in Ghana in January 2020. Unfortunately, COVID hit. But as during that period, I was in the process of restarting our internship program, and also getting us to start looking at engineering schools in terms of hiring. As I started understanding this gap, I'm here in Ghana. I've been sharing with universities, other companies that have formal technical programs that they bring into schools in order to help connect the gap. Because if you take Unilever as an example, we are a manufacturer of finished goods, but there are companies who supply their equipment to us, and we maintain the equipment per the standards that they give us. So the way in which we can help is to connect those manufacturing companies of equipment with the likes of Assesio or other universities, to then say, hey, a program can be developed. And I know these companies are investing in free training and free programs. So it's just connecting the two. I won't call the company's names just because I don't have permission to, but it is something that can easily be done.
Mm-hmm. So you may not necessarily be the custodian of some of these technologies and equipment as Unilever, but there other organizations that are providing this. And I'm going back to the hidden curriculum that Prof. Bailey mentioned, and thinking there's a hidden industry here that we probably are not looking at, because instinctively everybody will look at the big manufacturers and say, let's go to this place to study or to have that experience. But apparently there are service providers who are best suited to do this. And so for me, Prof. Bailey, I'm wondering, you've mentioned there is that difficulty, but is this something that, this dynamic that Bernie just shared, is that something that as educational institutions on the continent we are aware of? And how are we, collaborating with the likes of Unilever and, all the other people who know about this space to be able to provide these opportunities to us? How do we do that in education, Prof. Bailey?
So still we are in the technical part, right? So I think that the private industry if I share my previous experience in engineering education. So at Bahar Dar University, when I was working there as a president, a private firm from the US, we partnered together. That really the student has to know very good technical skill, electronics and mechanical engineer. So what we did was the private company brought equipment from a ship, from real ship, and they put it in the university campus. Electronics that mimic totally the electronics of the ship, brought it to the campus. And then we use that machinery, all the tools that they are going to use was brought to the campus. And then we trained using that together with them. The university provided that, the legal framework, brought the student and brought all the, the infrastructure when I say the building. And so far, we have exported 1,300 Ethiopian to this high demanding market, and it's going to increase. I think that similarly, we partner with a local company, textile company, who gave us, we use it to have that, still we have that in Bahar Dar University, that biggest textile engineering school. And we brought the equipment. They don't use it anymore, but it's very similar. So we brought it to the campus and we use it to train students. I think in that way, actually, we can save. It's not only like that particular program. It's really create a new energy among other students, and that really change the way the engineering education is being offered. The impact is huge. So I don't know, Bernie, what do you think this kind of model working with a company like yours?
So it's spot on. It's in my view the best way to get that engagement and exposure for the students. It benefits the companies as well, because then you hires in the future and you have a pipeline of folks who have initial experience, and when you bring them into, if you're able to bring them to the company as positions may open up, it becomes an easy, natural fit. So I think it's a very, very good way to get started and help close that gap.
I'm wondering, Dr. Bisaka, from your perspective, you work a lot in communities, so you have a lot of people-facing roles that you deal with, and so for you, soft skills is really key. You mentioned ability to communicate, ability to be able to have interpersonal skills, for instance, problem solving, leadership skills, right? So those are some of the things that you mentioned. And these are not necessarily things that, we don't necessarily have a course, problem solving 101 in universities, right? And so I'm wondering how, in your sector, in your space, how do you collaborate with educational institutions to make sure that students coming out have some of these skills that you say you require, and some of which are not necessarily readily available? And hearing from the examples that Prof. Bailey just gave us, how have you done that in your space?
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. I think this question I'll answer in line also with the concern that Lillian raised with regards to where employers come in. And I just want to mention that usually we are supposed to come in, of course, from the conception stage of university curriculum. And one thing is important, because it's not about just coming up with a maybe curriculum that is going to address everything generally, but it's also about looking at the context in which we want to develop this curriculum, and also the institution for which the curriculum is being developed. And as community organizations and also NGOs, what happens is that usually we go more through advocacy to be able to create channels that we can engage in communication, but also propose concrete, dimensions or thematic areas or disciplines that respond to the community needs, but most especially the needs that we as community organizations and NGOs do require. And in terms of course, getting these skills like problem solving, leadership, and the rest, what happens is that usually we get into partnerships with existing universities or other higher institutions, especially those of professional learning orientation, to provide career orientation, project management kind of skills, but also community service kind of trainings at the level of first year, second year, and third year before many of them get to graduate. And well, it's not very consistent or regular because of some reasons, but generally we find that most of the students who get to receive this kind of orientation, this kind of training, at or during their school or university years, they tend to perform better when they graduate than those who go through, these higher educational institutions without having received such career orientation, mentorship, leadership training, and even some exchange programs that we also try to propose and do organize with some institutions, although this remains really very challenging because many of them sometimes don't get to create room for this kind of collaboration to really be effective as we do desire it to be.
One thing that has come across now is, curriculum design, and also, just the time to put that into the curriculum. For Bailey, you mentioned that it's difficult, your curriculum poses some constraints in terms of being able to inculcate some skills. And Dr. Saka, you mentioned, you being able to go into the schools to do some of these things, but sometimes even just the space, the opportunity to do it is a difficult thing for you. And maybe what would help is if these curriculum are designed in collaboration with industry, right? So we will come to the issue of curriculum and how we go about it. But first, Imad has his hand up. Imad, please unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to ask a question. So I would like to comment this discussion. So I'm located here in Germany. Our company is a training system provider and supplier, basically in the technical education sector. We talked about cooperation and partnership between industrial companies and educational sector. Unfortunately, a lot of employers, they don't see themselves as educator and qualifier. They see themselves as producer, to gain money, to make more business with product. And this is exactly the problem in creating jobs. If we talk about collaboration and cooperation, we have to ask the industrial companies, why do they, or what do they need to create new jobs? What kind of job profiles do they need? Not every company needs electrical engineer or mechanical engineer. Some of them, they need something else, for example, robotic engineer or automation engineer. So we need to ask them what they need to create new jobs together with the universities. The point of Mr. Bailey, it's very important, and the example of Bahir Dar University. By the way, Bahir Dar University is one of my customer. And one thing is, as I mentioned already, a lot of companies, they don't invest in education, unfortunately. They invest in machines, they invest in building, they invest maybe in new cars, but not in education to qualify people. I don't have a lot of numbers in Africa in general, but I believe that a lot of new educated or new graduated engineers in Africa, they came out from universities and they don't find job very, very fast. Not because the university is bad, not at all, but because the companies, they look more and more to high qualified engineers and new graduated. The hands-on practice is missing. A lot of universities, they have perfect curricula, but unfortunately based on a lot of theory and very less part on practical work. So my question is, I don't know if we have here employers from Africa and East or West Africa. My question is, do you have a strategy to cooperate between industries and universities? And if yes, what kind of strategy? Is it short-term strategy, long-term strategy? I would like to know more about the cooperation between universities and industries. As I mentioned already, I'm located here in Germany, and here in Germany we have the dual system, which is the best technical training system at all in Europe. Universities have a lot of cooperation and partnerships with a lot of companies. And some of these companies are located even in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Ghana. Why we cannot implement this system to Africa as well? So I would be happy if someone from the participants here can comment to my question and explain to me, because I'm not very experienced, don't have a lot of experience in the African market, but I would like to learn from you if it's possible and how can we do it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Imad. And you do raise a good point about employers also being part of education and should, seeing themselves as educators as well. And I think it's for this reason that we do have employer representatives on this platform as well. We will be delving deeper into, how to make this connection work, because it looks like we're all aligned that there is a disconnect between what is being taught in school, what industry expects, and the roles that everybody needs to play, but which isn't necessarily happening. And we will delve deeper into that when we go into the breakout rooms. Lillian, you have your hand up.
I sort of wear different hats. So when this question came to universities, I'm answering on behalf of University of Embu. I am a board member, a council member. I represent the government in the university because it's a public funded university. And as a board, what we do is create policy, confirm the university has the right strategy. And I like that question about how universities in Africa, or I would like to comment about Kenya and specifically University of Embu, how they work with the industry. I also mentioned that I had the UK experience. I worked at University of Oxford. So I'll be comparing all these different areas. So first, when I worked in University of Oxford, what I saw is the industry coming to make those strategies with the university, funding them when there was a gap of funding, and working together, even sometimes employing the right staff. My experience on the African continent is industries work with universities, but they don't work side by side. I also worked in Strathmore where I was in charge of partnerships. And I saw gaps where the industries did not understand what place they played in university. In fact, they were ready to help, but there's so many challenging priorities. So, having created that area specifically to say, this is a university relations office or someone who is able to even confirm what the government wants. So at University of Embu, we've started a journey of 1,000 miles. And really this is supported by the highest organ, the board, where we are ensuring that we are bringing our students very close to the industry. It's not going to be perfect, but it's a journey of 1,000 miles. So what I'm really saying is that gap is there. And if there's a way we can lobby the right industries to begin to give this true picture, because I think in Africa, the industry is not sure. And that's my perspective, that's my view of how to work with university. Yeah, at IANIT Alolom, we are trying to create that synergy between industry and the university. And last year I was fortunate to run a research project, which was looking at some of the best companies in Africa. So here was a management innovation project from a university. And my experience of getting the industry to participate was very tedious. It was very tiring. They almost felt like, you know what, this is not going to bring profits. Yeah. So I'm speaking candidly because these are some of the things that I feel need to be addressed right from the bottom, from the roots. Yeah. Universities are very keen to work with the industry, but my experience is sometimes the industries look at it like, you know, we are quite busy. Yeah. And then again, at the end of this conference, can we look at how many organizations, not universities, have participated in this? I think that will be quite also a very good place to start, such that I think, you know, when I reflect about it, we could have said, could we bring this quota of industries? How do we do that? Yeah, such that when we organize these conferences, we are not just looking at universities, we are looking at the ecosystems in which universities operate. Yeah. My final, you know, parting shot is at University of Embu, we are strong for agriculture. So we are excelling a lot when it comes to partnership with farmers, yeah, with local organizations that support farmers. I can assure you that is working. But the question is, how many students want to go into farming again? So, you know, it's one thing when you're excelling in an area, but is that the area students want to apply? They all want to do law, they all want to do business. So this whole topic is complicated. It's not as simple as which industries. It's, you know, aligning the companies, the students, the curriculum, yeah, and the funding, yeah, because funding is what really enables even the faculty to be driven, yeah, because if you don't have enough funding, faculty are teaching. You don't have the faculty that sits on the side thinking about partnerships with industry. You don't have faculty that is coming from the industry. Look at the case of Oxford University where I worked. There was a lot of faculty coming from the industry. So you didn't even need to look for the industry. The industry was part of your, you know, of your team. Thank you so much. I could speak about this topic, which I'm very passionate about, but I hope those insights have opened, you know, have helped the question that was asked, but at the same time have led us to more thinking about this area. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Lillian. And Dr. Samuel Murithi, I'll come to you shortly. Just a few things that are coming up for me that I think we can continue to delve deeper into in the breakout rooms to really bring out what it is that, you know, the gap is and what we really need to be doing. We've spoken about curriculum, we've spoken about signposting. So like Lillian mentioned, do all African higher institutions have an office or someone in charge of going to pursue industry for all of these opportunities for collaboration? And do industry as well, you know, have it, you know, out there where universities know exactly how to partner with them and where they can also be able to collaborate and aligning, you know, the world of work is changing and interests are changing. And so are we necessarily aligning interest from, you know, students to courses, to job opportunities available on the market, and our industry partnerships as well? And you raised a point about funding and faculty as well. We tend to have a lot of faculty who come from academia and not necessarily from industry. I think Lillian has made a point for having faculty coming from industry. So these are some of the things that, you know, we could explore further in our breakout room, especially if you have experiences of, you know, how these have innovative solutions that other institutions in other countries have been able to adopt to deal with some of these issues that we're outlining now. Dr. Murithi, you can go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Dr. Murithi. I'm the academic director. This is the university, Nairobi, Kenya. And I see from your discussion and from what I know is that it's like we are going to two different directions. The industry, kind of like parallel, because the industry are going their way, the universities are going their way, the university with their theories, and the industry with the practicals. Where they meet, I don't know where they will meet, because what you find the teachers who are teaching, really, and there's a really big challenge even here at in East Africa. The teachers who are teaching, are they competent to offer the student the skills that the industry need? You find that somebody has learned theory, completed and all the way to PhD, and finished, and then come back to class, just give the same theory. So really, most of the universities are not preparing their students for the industry. But I agree that we need to move to that direction, whereby probably a liaison office between the industry and the university need to be established in every university, so that the industry can come there and really they have a focal point, because the industry themselves many of them don't even understand what is going on in the university. A fundamental question would be, how many of the industries are started by graduates who are from the universities? And what I know from Kenya is that not many of them are started by graduates. And if that is the case, of course we have a lot of them, but if that is the case, then it means that what the university are offering and what the industry are offering could be totally different things. The industry themselves are very practical. The education is very theory. In DESTA, one of the things that we've done and we have succeeded is to have we are one of the reading program is communication, and we have a radio station. By having a radio station, this is how our students practice. So when they graduate, already they know how a radio station learn. They can do the programming. They can learn. It's a kind of what we call community radio, 100-kilometer radius. A radio station operated by students, guided by their teachers. And I think that's kind of like a small industry whereby universities can do the same. Of course, like I think has been mentioned by the person from Embu, that is not a lot of investment. But as we stand and as we look at the situation as is, until these two groups, the university and the industry, come together and pave a way forward, we will continue learning two parallel directions. Yes.
Definitely, Dr. Moriti, thank you for that. So industry, university need to come together to do that, and we will definitely explore that. I'm wondering, right, we say coming together, we say we're looking for these skills. Is there a rubric by which we are measuring these skills? Have university and industry come together to say, in terms, it's very easy to measure technical skills, I think, right? If you've done engineering, you've done, you have Excel skills. We give you a computer, you're able to do Excel, you have it, right? There's no challenge in that. There's, if you're able to operate a certain machine, they're very, we are able to say, if you're able to turn this on or put this in that, then you have the competency. But I'm wondering whether we've been able to come together to decide, as Africans and African institutions looking to groom African talent and hire African talent, whether we've been able to define for ourselves what soft skills should look like. What we say communication skills, we say adaptability and leadership and all of that. Is leadership in Africa the same as leadership in Europe or Asia or in other countries? Are there particular traits that we look for because of our context? And with skills like time management and all of that. In Ghana, I know we have something we call the Ghana Man Time, where we're ceremoniously late for a lot of things, right? But we say we need productive skills, and time management is one of those productive skills. How are we translating that from a concept that is shared broadly in other cultures to something that is very African, that we have imbibed and that we have a way of measuring? Prof. Bailey, I don't know if you're able to speak to how you're able to measure some of these, transferable skills and competencies in your students. And Benny and Dr. Saka, you can also chime in about, what kind of standards you use to measure to say someone has good interpersonal skills.
Thank you very much. I think the competencies that we are interested for students to acquire can be measured. In general, broadly speaking, there are two types of assessments, we say. kind of a content assessment and then competency-based assessment. So if we focus on learning and we give a student different resources to learn from, and then ask them to do a task that kind of mimic the real work-like project, and they are able to do that kind of task in a variety of setting, like you give them in a variety of ways. That's where actually I was going to ask Dr. Saka about his engagement with the university, if it involves also supporting the university to develop this kind of project-based assessment, where projects are actually kind of coming from them, and the students are given the data or whatever the scenario, the real scenario in the work, and the students are asked to come up with a solution using all the resources, instead of like the teacher coming to the class, teaching the student a content, and then asking them later to really remember or solve that particular theory, or apply that particular theory to another theoretical or hypothetical problem. Our way is that we give a student different resources, books, audios, and teacher also a little bit like facilitating, and then we give them a project to do. That project should really be contextual, should really be from the industry, as much as possible coming from industry. So if the student really demonstrates that these dominant competencies by completing that real project, I think then the student has acquired that competency. So in that way, actually we can drive learning, and we can also bring industry in the actual learning process.
That Prof. Belly has highlighted. The first, of course, the competency, because when you take again a context like that of Cameroon, you discover that the government and of course some private sector stakeholders have actually been working on promoting this approach. But then when you look from a content-based perspective, you will notice that there is still a lot to be done, because the content does not reflect what in principle and policy is actually stated. And one of the strategies that government has actually used also to ensure that this idea of maybe quality content, but also market-driven kind of skills are developed, is to give the kind of, or create a kind of enabling environment for private sector operators to come in and create training institutions wherein they can be able to design, curriculum and be able to train students with the kind of skills that respond to their industry needs. And while this is really something commendable, the unfortunate thing is that sometimes also you don't have the trainers or the teachers that have those practical skills to transfer to these students. Because I take a simple example, you can have a professor who has been teaching entrepreneurship for 30 years, but who has never tried to create a business, who has never, worked in that kind of business environment. And so he continues or she continues to teach the students the theory, but in practice, one who is not necessarily a professor or a doctor, but has had practical experience in creating a business can teach the students based on the experiences he or she has actually had from the field. And maybe he or she might have tried and failed several times. That is a good experience, to be able to teach these students. But then the context we find ourselves in Cameroon, but also from other African countries, is that sometimes you have this kind of public-private partnerships that work in the context of, designing good content or quality content, but in terms of deliverables, it is lacking. And another very important thing about how we do work with universities is that sometimes also you discover that universities do engage, employers' union in the kind of reforms that they try to bring into the educational milieu, especially higher education. But again, the challenge comes in with also being able to put into practice what has been maybe agreed upon by these stakeholders. For instance, if you don't have the infrastructure to support training, irrespective of how good the content is, you see that still we do not achieve the kind of results that we want. So the government, private investors, industries, and all of us, from community perspectives and the rest, we're trying to work together, but there is still a lot, that needs to be done, especially when it comes to putting into practice what is being said or what the policy is actually trying to maybe address or put forward as the ideal for our context.
And ended on that note of practicality, I just want to pick up on conversations in the chat between Abigail, Dr. Ude, and Marianne. So Abigail is asking whether, are we properly defining what these transferable skills are and defining what should be measured? And is it possible that perhaps we've been defining it differently, and hence, the divide that we're currently seeing? And Jennifer makes a very, solid point about cultural awareness, right? We say intercultural awareness is very key for employment. Whose culture are we, do we want people to be aware about, right? If I'm Ghanaian and I'm working in Nigeria, whose culture should I be aware of, right? And Marianne makes the point about universities with students from all over the continent. What is local context, and what is trying to contextualize these soft skills? So I feel we've opened a can of worms, but I also feel like, these questions that, these three contributors have just asked is probably a good starting point for us to define for ourselves what these transferable skills look like. What do these soft skills look like? What do these productive skills that we're looking for, what do they look like on the continent? We need to define that. We need to define what the local and the cultural context are. And we need to have a standardized way of measuring these across, so that, when I say we require this level of adaptability, but this is the level the students are coming from. Who's defining the level, right? On whose basis are we measuring all of these things? So maybe that would be, a good starting point for us to start defining these competencies and to figure out, whether or not we are achieving them. And I think another point, to this conversation is that we have realized the competencies we need now, but the world of work is changing, right? How is that looking for us on the continent in the next 5 years? And Bernie, maybe you can shed a few insights on this. In the next 10 years, for instance, how should African higher education institutions be preparing young students for the job market? Looking at your industry and where things are going, what are the skills you'll be needing that you don't currently have, or what are the skills that are currently available that won't be relevant for you in the next 5 to 10 years? Just so that as we go into the breakout rooms, we're also thinking of some of these future skills. So Bernie, if you can just shed some light on that.
Okay, so I think all the comments that have come across summarizes what we'll be looking for in the future. Whether or not it's the cultural, and as I get the cultural awareness that's been stated, the soft skills, the technical skills, it's a dynamic environment. And it's interesting when you talk about cultural awareness. I'm not from Ghana, I'm not from Nigeria, I was born and raised in the US. So everywhere I travel, I have to respect the different cultural dynamics. And we have folks from Sri Lanka working in our factory, we have people from Nigeria working in our factories. So all of the messages that have been stated, I think are fair and spot on. And I think it's having the flexibility now where everyone has recognized the problem is to put an action plan, to your point, around how you're going to solve that and move forward. I say if you do a 10-year plan, I will focus on the first 2 years because just as COVID hit us, we don't know what's going to happen. But if you have the right direction and the end game you're trying to achieve, I would say taking these points, start focusing on the actions.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, Bernie. we could focus on who's doing what, who's supposed to be doing what and not doing it, or also focus on trying to have our action plan. So we understand what's going on. We know the issues, right? And if we were to plan for the next 2 years, what should we basically do? I've seen a peer ask a question about, do administrators do universities even know what to look out for when they're trying to partner with a company, and the intentionality around it? How should we plan for it going forward, right? The gaps are there, the misalignment is there. We've identified all of those things. What are the practical steps that we can take towards resolving that? And like I keep saying, it will be great if we can start harvesting some of these innovations that we have implemented in our institutions, seen other people do it or read about or heard someone talk about them, and let's bring them all together so that after this session, after this education collaborative, we're able to come together and say, hey, from the discussions that we had, this is what's going on. These are the practical things that are easy to do in the next 1 to 2 years to move the needle on this subject. And these are probably the things that will take us 10 years to go. But at the end of the day, we are clear in our heads what needs to be changed immediately and what can be changed in the future.
Thank you again for the rich discussions, really. As we are preparing to break out into the rooms, I would hope the discussions would really focus more on the areas. For example, we have already identified what gaps already exist and what are the needs actually for higher education institutions, as well as industry and community. What we really need to do. So basically, the breakout room sessions, I would hope to really see, like what Sylvie mentioned earlier, what are the things, for example, me as a professional need to draw from those discussions and implement, for example, at my institution to improve the institution that I work at, as well as to enable our students to be more efficient, especially when they go to the labor market.
Let me just use this opportunity to say thank you to our panelists, Dr. Saka, Prof. Bailey, and Bernie. Thank you so much for the insights you've shared and for guiding the conversation, and to everybody else for really interesting conversations and keeping the chat busy and active. I haven't been able to ask all the questions because, like I said, we've opened a kind of worms, and it wouldn't take us just today. But I think we're heading in the right direction where we all realize that we need to come together and decide for ourselves what this looks like, how we're going to go about it, and what milestones we can set between now and the next foreseeable future to make this happen. So thanks everyone for your time and contribution as well. Welcome, Ayado, and so everybody has mentioned, Ayado will be taking over this session with the moderation, and she will go ahead to introduce herself. So over to you, Ayado.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Ayado. I am the director of Africa Careers Network at African Leadership Academy. Excited to be here, and I look forward to hearing the lessons that we all get from this session.
So for this session, what we'll be looking at is to get some of the outcomes that came out of the discussions, as well as some of those things that the panelists may wish to kind of really highlight in terms of the general group to really take on board in terms of making those recommendations within the organizations vis-a-vis every single area that we may want to really impact, whether it being in terms of employer engagement or in terms of higher education institutions readiness, as well as the community engagement with higher education institutions, as well as also kind of highlight briefly some of the experiences from their own institutions in terms of what they're really doing and what has been working so far, in addition to the general discussions or the general contributions from the participants within the groups. And then from there, then have like general recommendations that we all can actually take on board and kind of commit to in terms of pushing the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks for prefacing that. Great. So I'll start with Prof. Bailey. Do you want to just share back what you had from the sessions, what stood out to you, and think about also your work environment and what some of the things you take away and things that you're currently doing? Would you like to kind of take it away?
So in our breakout session, we were trying to understand what we are doing and the disconnect between what we are doing with our students in terms of helping them to acquire the competencies that we are helping them to acquire and what the labor market's needs are. Practically, the discussion focused on understanding who are these employers. How can we describe the employers in the context of Africa? The major employers, are they, what these qualities they are looking for, and who are they, and how are we aligned with them in terms of offering? And also there was a question about how we are helping schools before students reach to our campus. What are institutions doing to support schools crowded with many students in the classroom? We also discussed about the project assessment a bit. So I think that's more or less what we have been discussing from the session, from the group. If there is anyone, feel free to add. Maybe I forget something. Thank you.
Are you able to just highlight just briefly for us what some of the clear gaps that came out from the group discussion this afternoon?
I think that the key thing that came out is there are really lots of rooms for improvement in terms of what we are doing at higher education institution, especially in terms of helping our students to acquire the skill the industries are looking for. That's really the key things that came out, and the things that we can do in terms of curriculum, in terms of really aligning out the way we teach our students, in terms of our focus, the competencies that we are focusing on. That's really the key things that came out in our breakout session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So it seems like curriculum and merging curriculum and competencies would be something that you've kind of highlighted as a gap. Thank you for that.
Curriculum, pedagogy, and then assessment. And then how do you really align that to the curriculum, to the needs of the employer? Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'd love to hear from Dr. Saka. What some of the things that stood out from you from your discussion? What gaps did you identify from the discussion?
So we try to look at the gaps between community, and here we're looking at community-based organizations, NGOs, and stakeholders in that domain, and also higher education institutions. And one gap that stands out is again that of the curriculum, which is not adapted to community problems. And in this case also participants feel that there is something lacking when it comes to those who are in charge of designing the curriculum, but also the needs or challenges that the communities are going through. And in this case, it is but vital for them to be able to see how to create the connection between the curriculum designers and also community stakeholders. Another important element that stands out, especially as far as the gaps are concerned, is that of volunteerism, because we understand that volunteerism offers some of those opportunities for students to have, the experience that is highly needed by employers. Unfortunately, students are not willing to embrace volunteerism because maybe they are not going to get any money. And of course, since the perception of volunteerism is that they are going to do it for free. So they tend not to see the skills and experience part of it, which they will benefit. And this becomes more challenging because the question of how do we then encourage students.
Okay, so while we wait for him to come back, can I ask the next reporter to kind of tell us what their insights were? Bernard Conyers, do you mind just giving us some context of how your conversation went within your group, and what are some of the insights that came out?
Okay, I would say there's 3 or 4 main buckets that came out. First one was around the soft skills and communication skills within different cultures, and how do you manage people in an education environment that come from different places around Africa. And so while they may have similar technical skills, their communication skills would be different. Things were mentioned like time management, eating habits, etc. So there needs to be a bit around cultural literacy, and how to immerse people into different environments. So as they go out into industry, especially if it's outside of their home country, they're able to adjust and to fit. There's a view around management training is not prescriptive. It needs to be applied in the context. So in this case, teachers should be exposed to where students are coming from. There was an analogy, and if I got this right, apologies if I juggle it a bit, but it was around a student may be coming from Congo going to a school in Kenya, wanting to understand about peace, but the Kenyan professor may see it as a different perspective of peace, and while the student from Congo is trying to understand regional peace. And so having teachers with that exposure will help better suit students that are coming to different countries for education. Then there's a bit around problem-based learning, and essentially having the students become the center of learning and bringing solutions to problems versus real industry problems, not just I'm giving students theoretical answers or problems. And so then there's a view around industry should see universities as a resource to help innovate. And so universities can use the students and the professors at schools to help solve problems and essentially become dedicated resources. There was a perspective around students show difficulty in understanding what's really needed in the job market. So thus, at one university, they have a career choice or career department, which understands what's needed in the job market and to help provide training to those students so they're ready for the market. Then there was discussion around partnering with companies to help develop a curriculum that is fit for purpose. And so thus, as curriculums are being developed, if you were to take the banking industry or the commerce industry, they were bringing bankers, insurance companies at the very beginning of building that curriculum to help ensure that the program is fit for purpose. And in parallel, they would set up attachments. So then the students are doing an internship and they can spend 3 to 6 months understanding what really goes on in the industry. The lecturers would then do an assessment. The students would come back with a report. But then the question came up, well, practically what can be done to really have an effective program? And the answers to that was probably our most in-depth conversation around, in some cases, universities are built around industry. They've developed long-term relationships with employers. They come together to build the strategies, and so there becomes that relationship or partnership. So if, for example, a company is looking for engineers, they will work with the university specifically for that company to help develop a program that will generate engineers in the future. it was also say that one model of engagement doesn't fit all for all universities or for all industries. And so really saying, hey, there are companies that make investments, with industries in order to have a set of students that are able to come out and work in the marketplace, and essentially trying to break what is in the university versus what is really happening in practice. And then the last bit was around the challenges when the training solutions are received as a gift. So it's again making sure that the universities and the industries or companies are really working together with catered solutions that fits the university program and also that of industry. So those were our topic points that came up over a very quick 40 minutes, but I think that sums it up. And folks on the call, if I miss anything, please advise.
Thanks, Bernie. Can I ask you a question before you disappear? So you spoke about two things that excite me, I think, within the work that I do. So you spoke about the contextual learning, and you spoke about the fact that institutions have different scholars coming from various parts of the continent, and their interpretation of some themes or words may be different. And the aspect of intercultural or cross-cultural learning is something that's really important. Do you feel that this is important for just the teachers or the educators, or do you think that this aspect is important for the wider group of the staff that would engage with these students? Because if you think about it, this young person has crossed borders to come to this institution. So there's a lot of learning and resilience they have had to kind of build. What do you think is the most practical way for the cross-learning to happen? Is it going physically to these environments, or what are some of the things you're thinking about in that aspect?
Okay, so I didn't raise the point, but I will give my perspective, and then I'll ask for the individual who raised the point to also add. I would say everyone needs to understand their own perspective. And if I take my case, working here in Ghana, not being Ghanaian, there are products that I don't understand. And so I have to go into your markets and understand what's happening in order for me to understand how to communicate that within my team, or if there's a consumer issue or whatever. So I think it's a responsibility of everyone at the organization to understand how they can best have a cohesive environment for the scholar. But I'm on the industrial side, but that's for those. I'm sorry, who raised this point? I didn't catch that in my notes.
I think I might be the one who started and then someone else added on. But from my perspective, one of the challenges that I had identified was particularly the soft skills of communications, where our university is highly technical. So it's very easy to identify which skills they're gaining from a technical perspective and to have that dialogue with the partners. But when it comes to self-expression, it's widely varied. So I was saying that you may have a situation where students from Rwanda, and I use the example just very loosely, Rwanda and Nigeria are competing for a similar opportunity with an employer. They might have similar set of skills, but when it comes to conveying those skills to the employer, the one from Nigeria could be stronger in self-expression, which means that the Rwandan would lose that opportunity. And I mean, the same could apply in a Kenyan context, in a Ghanaian context, and all of that. So how do we reconcile all these differences or these gaps when we're dealing with such a diverse population? And I think the question that you posed, Ayado, is very relevant. I think it needs to be confronted at every level of the institution. So it's administration, it's faculty, it's students, and then also industry. So I was wondering really to my group, how can we make that conversation happen? How can we acknowledge these differences and work towards filling some of those gaps, or at least even understanding one another, right?
Thanks for that. I imagine that's Marie Rukundo.
Yes,
it's hear your voice. It is. you. Okay, cool. I think what you're mentioning is very practical, and how you're bringing it back to industry is really important. And again, Bunny, you're on the hot seat for now. We will release you, I promise you. But I think a follow-up question to that is, what has your experience been about? So let me give you a practical example. One of the things that we constantly do within this space is also facilitating some elements of like mock learning opportunities for these scholars, whereby I, as a scholar, for example, may come to you as an employer, and we run like a mock interview session. And your feedback to me is, I'm not loud enough, or I'm not pronouncing the words properly, or I'm not looking you into in the eye, things which may contribute towards me not getting a job, right? What is your experience on this? And do you think one size fits all as regards to, as an interviewee, I need to look you straight into the eye and I need to speak up? Do you take cultural differences into perspective? Like, what has your experience been? And then I promise I will release you and ask other people questions.
So one size does not fit all. I've had some interviews that have been interesting, where technically the person was spot on, and when I would talk to either their mentors, advisors, or it could be someone transferring from another company, the feedback was stellar, but they didn't do well in the interview. And so in those cases, we have taken people on, and I've seen people taken other companies who may not fit all the boxes, but you can develop the other spaces on the box. So I think the feedback is for everyone to push. We do give feedback to folks who interview with us behind the scenes, and help them where if it's a very much a soft skill thing, like, hey, we can help improve in that space. So it is something that is reviewed and considered, but it's not going to be the end all be all, just because someone like I stutter, and unless I'm focusing and trying not to stutter, I will start. So and some people actually has been used against me, but at the same time, I've been able to move through my career and learn how to practice communication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It does, and thank you for being vulnerable with us to also just share some of the things that you experience. Marianne, I see your comments. I'll go ahead and read it. I've been fortunate to receive unsolicited feedback on students' interview skills, and in those cases, it often comes off from international companies, not necessarily local partners, and it's often after the fact, after they've missed out on the opportunity. I never thought of actually involving companies in having students practice their skills. Thanks, Marianne, for that comment. Okay, Dr. Saka, welcome back. Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you 5 on 5.
Perfect. So you left off when you're speaking about something very, very, very interesting, and you're talking about volunteerism, and I know it was part of your sharing back. Do you mind just continuing with your sharing back, and I'll come back to the question of volunteerism?
Yes, thank you, and sorry for those very glitches. So, highlight the question of volunteerism, but most especially the fact that university students or students from other higher institutions really are not willing to embrace volunteerism because of the general perception that volunteerism is obviously not going to be, anything payable for them. And this means that they want to, get jobs that they would readily be paid. And of course, when searching for these jobs, they are being required to provide work experience, which they don't have. So you see, they spend lots of years, looking for employment, but then without the experience which they could have readily acquired through volunteerism. So the question in the group is, how do we then encourage these students to be able to embrace volunteerism? Of course, some of the group members did think that it's important to start giving some sort of sensitization or more orientation within higher education milieus, so that students who are, pursuing higher education can already engage at an early stage into some volunteerism activities through community organizations. That way, they are able to develop some, skills and experience by the time they graduate, and can therefore readily fit into the job market. And again, I think one of the very strong points that came out was that some of the community organizations actually do play a vital role as far as liaising between, higher education institutions and other employers actually, because when you look at the context of Africa, you discover that sometimes most of our institutions do not necessarily have the capacity to drill, students on the various skills that they may directly require in the community or maybe in the employment market. But then some of these community organizations are able to identify what the communities need and can clearly communicate to the universities or higher education institutions, but also to other employers, and are able to put them in a position not just to follow, focus on credentials, but also mostly on skills. Because sometimes you find that most of the employers out there obviously are looking for skills, your competencies, but then universities are more focused maybe on producing, students, and then the question of credentials is more prioritized, when actually skills development should be the case. And I think at this point even, this answers one of the questions that Prof. Berry raised earlier on about how do we measure even, the standards. And it's just but important that we are able to see at what students of higher education, but especially we're able to place them on internship maybe on a semester basis. This is actually one of the things I've observed here in Cameroon, and I've been able to also receive students on this basis at the level of my organization. And this sometimes really gives the students more practical experience, while they are able also to blend theory with practice. So I think these are just some of those high points that we have. And we had very interesting, experiences like the one from Nigeria with the talent management and accelerator program, which actually focuses on, talent attraction, selection, retention, and growth of students. I think these kind of models are being introduced in context of, countries like Nigeria, and if they are proving to be successful, then they also should be taken to another level. We could scale them and see how also we could be able to bridge some of the gaps that we do notice.
Thank you. There are many questions that come up as you are speaking for me. I think the first one, I'll hop on to the volunteerism aspect. So there's a world where logically we see the importance of volunteerism. It's really, really important because it's part of the ecosystem of a young person building the skills which an employer will come and say they need experience for. But then practically, when I look at the kinds of scholars we have and the kinds of resources they have, right? So the luxury of volunteering for an opportunity may not necessarily exist. How do you go about kind of shifting the mind of this young person, or actually even potentially the organization that they're going to partner with? Because let's think about just Maslow's very basic, hierarchy of needs. I need to eat, I need a roof over my head, and I need clothing. How do we marry these two needs, the real need of I need to eat, to developing the skills I do need for the long term through volunteerism? Do you have any ideas on that? Because for me, I feel like that is also almost the beginning of helping both parties kind of come to the table for there to be potentially a middle ground, if at all possible. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think, you see, this is actually an area where we have focused so much on, especially with the work we do at the level of our organization in Cameroon. And one of the things that happens is that we have to go back again into the training milieu or the institutions that train students. And here, you need community organizations, you need, the employers to be able to come in at the very beginning of higher education training to provide the right orientation to the students. And this does not have to come from space, or it doesn't have to be theoretical again, but it has to come from practitioners. And this is a time where you have to introduce role models in the educational context so that you're able to bring success stories of other young people that have succeeded through volunteerism, for instance, to acquire better jobs, to get experience which is required in the job market, and to be able to, grow at individual but also institutional level. You need to be able to bring such role models and success stories to inspire and, of course, to mentor these students at the level of their training spaces. And I think this is a critical moment, because sometimes you find out that even the teachers who teach these students for maybe 3-4 years for undergrads and maybe even masters, sometimes they don't have the experience. So you see that it's more or less garbage in, garbage out. And so sometimes I ask myself, how do you give what you don't have? You see, so we have to bring in practitioners into the teaching milieu so that they can drill the students. We have to bring in mentors, because this is also something that is lacking. Mentorship is lacking, and it's a very critical, component that has to be embraced if really we would be able to promote some more productive relationship between community, industry, and higher education. And practically, I think it's about also the university and maybe in designing their curriculum, being able to provide space and resources for this. Because sometimes also we could make good proposals, but if they are not captured and if resources are not allocated to really ensure that this is done, we do not yield the kind of results that are needed. So I think these are just some of the entry points. And like I earlier said, it's about being able to forge a permanent dialogue between the community, the training institutions or higher institutions of learning, but also the employers. And when this is really permanent, frank, transparent, we are able, to evolve and to be able to adapt the training to market needs, but also we're able to provide the right skills, the right training to the students, while being able to open them up to the many opportunities that exist out there. And I'm happy because someone mentioned the issue of limited, information or access to opportunities. And this is one of those areas wherein if you do not expose the students to these opportunities, sometimes you don't expect them also to know how important some of these skills that are needed in the job market are. So they get to discover that they needed some skills only when they are already in the job market. So it's like starting from square one. And that becomes sometimes very frustrating, where you have to meet your immediate needs after spending all the years in maybe school, but then you're faced also with the challenge of not being able to secure a job or to create one. Remember, most of our curriculum do not even focus on job creation. So you're faced with all of this challenge, and no employer wants to get you in without the skills, without the experience, but you're not ready to do volunteerism because you feel you're going to be wasting more time, you see, and then you waste more time by not doing the volunteerism and not getting employment. So you see, it's a thing which we really need to change mindset, change attitude towards, job creation, and of course, towards employability that reflects current market needs.
Thank you, Dr. Saka. I have a question that I want to ask all the speakers, but before I do, I would love for Dr. Samuel Mureithi to please unmute yourself and say more about the comments that you've kind of made on the chat section, if you don't mind.
What I said, and thank you for the opportunity and also for the comment and also for the meeting. What I said is that there's need for scholars to have an overview of Africa, so that because what you find is that we know so much about Europe, we know so much about America, but we know very little about our continent. So I have a student from Ghana, and I'm teaching about management. I'm using Kenya examples. The student from Ghana is in my class. Another one is from Ethiopia. He's in my class. What are they feeling when all the examples I'm using in class are from Kenya? And this is a student probably is taking a degree. You'll be in the university for the next 4 years. Every class he goes or she goes, that is a feeling. By the time they graduate, you can see how they feel, and probably they will hate their teachers, they will hate the system, and yet we expect these students to go back to their homes and apply the same knowledge. I don't know whether they'll use the Kenyan examples when they go home, because that's what but the problem is not the student. The problem is that, like I said, we can cite examples from Europe, from UK, from Germany, but we cannot cite examples from Ghana, from South Africa. My point is that the lecturer who is teaching an African student should be well conversant with the African culture, African economy, African social structure, and everything about culture, so that our student can be able to understand and we find it relevant in terms of education. He should be able to understand the industries in Ghana, so that if I'm talking about manufacturing, I should be talking about the cocoa industry in Ghana. Then the students from Ghana can find it relevant. And that's what I'm talking about. So that's a challenge I'm posing across.
And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of look at it. Thank you for bringing that up, right? So it's forcing us to look internally and forcing us to look at the opportunities and to work collaboratively with each other, regardless of the geographies that we come from. And I feel like this kind of speaks to what somebody's reported on earlier about like problem-based learnings. And I would argue I would add opportunity-based learning. Do you have any thoughts on what opportunity-based learnings could look like at university level?
Thank you. I'm still the one who talked about the problem-based learning.
Okay.
And with problem-based learning, what we're doing, and this is an example we are using in the university, Nairobi, Kenya, is whereby we bring the problem from the industry to the classroom. For example, we go to an industry, we find sometimes we bring the CEO and we tell him, what problem are you facing in the company? And the CEO will say that. We can also use case-based, and then let students talk about, find the answers, find the solution. They become the drivers, and the teacher facilitate learning, such that if I get a case study from Ghana about the cocoa industry and the challenges, then my student can be able to understand the industry in Ghana and be able to provide solution for that. So,
okay, we seem to have lost Dr. Mureithi. Lillian, do you want to just...
All right, I just wanted to comment and say I liked the idea of the mock interviews very much, and I think it's going to be new knowledge. My question was, when do we begin these mock interviews? And the reason I asked that question is because many years ago when I worked at Strathmore, I introduced a model where some students would go to the industry from their first semester, because then when they are learning in class and they say, I want to be an accountant, then they know they want to go into taxation or they want to go into consulting. I mean, because basically what happens is when they finish university and they've just been doing accounting, even when they go for interviews, the questions are, I'll give you an example of a recent question of a student who went for an interview with PwC, and they asked them, who are our clients? And these students genuinely said she didn't know. And you can imagine she didn't know because she had never interacted with PwC, And I think that's a very easy question. If someone had just done a semester or even 3 weeks at PwC. So my comment and my opinion is mock interviews can be something that can be introduced right at the beginning, so that when students are learning, they are learning the things that matter to the industry. Because mock interviews like a preparation of, when you come to us, what shall we expect you? And I think this is something which, for example, our Safaricom Foundation in Kenya is doing, and I think they'll be delighted to know that this is something they can do, because the organization has this strategy of working with young people, mentoring them, and their staff are mentoring. So you can see that any staff can do a mock interview, and then you have different stages where you bring in the staff So I asked it as a question, but I also recommended, based on my experience of working with Ernst & Young and Strathmore right at the beginning. So Ernst & Young and Strathmore have a partnership where they bring in students, right at the beginning when they join university. But it's a very competitive thing. It's a bit like a scholarship of a kind, yeah? Because they only take maybe about 4, yeah? But it's an opportunity that is there. So if someone wants to make another comment, that was my question and my view and my experience.
Thank you, Lillian. I'd love for the panel to kind of respond and give additional insights or input to that question. And I guess I can give my own input once that's done.
So, yeah, I think mock interview is very important to bring it actually, like I would consider it like part of career development. So the interview of that type starts actually even during admission, I would say. So the kind of question that we are asking them, what they are interested in, what they are interested to learn, and so on. And then after a certain level of competencies they have acquired, before I think that one sends the student to internship, that kind of mock interview is very critical to help them to understand what is waiting for them. Not only to understand what is waiting for them, but really to use the internship opportunity to get connected with the employer and to translate that internship opportunity into employment. So that kind of like understanding, bringing the mock interview, actually even bringing the employer really to the campus and ask them questions, interact with the student during the job fairs also is very critical in terms of making the student to be aware of what they have learned in school, what are the employers looking for, how they need to be prepared themselves in terms of jobs. So yeah, I would just say that the more we integrate the employer through, job fair, mock interview, the better employment outcome we get.
Thanks, Prof. Bailey. I think I would just add that. And then Dr. Muredi, I'll come back to you with a specific question. Dr. Saka, did you want to add something before I close this one out about the mock interviews?
Well, I think Prof. Bailey said something quite interesting, and I was just thinking that it's important to emphasize on this problem-solving, approach to teaching, which obviously falls within the framework of competency-based, because you notice that the teachers or lecturers, they do not just have to continue teaching the students to know, but it's about teaching them to know, but then how to apply. And so if the teachers, if the pedagogy is such that teachers can be able to evolve from just letting students to know, but letting them be able to see how to apply what they are knowing, it also helps in this process. And I think additionally, we observe that the teacher here has to be the first role model. And I'm sure that basic skills, including, of course, how to even write their CVs, how to write motivation letters, all of this has to be able to come in at, a very early stage. If not, you would see that the kind of experiences we have had sometimes during recruitment, wherein you ask a master's degree holder what he or she can do, and the response is, I have a master's or I have a degree in this. And so the question is, how do you translate your degree into resolving an organizational problem? For instance, maybe a project, or maybe, a technical issue that may advance or may help the organization to grow. These questions don't get to be answered. So I think that is just the basics that we could also emphasize at the stage of teaching or teacher-student relationship and pedagogy. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Saka. And I think just if I were to add my thoughts to that as well, is the importance of, like, the idea of mock interviews should start ideally from the very beginning. And I think it just forms the whole idea of self-advocacy for the scholar and the young person, right? So the whole idea of self-advocacy from the very beginning in terms of understanding what your curriculum looks like practically in industry. The example that Lillian just gave is really, really, it's profound, right? So it seems like common sense, but if we're not bringing aspects of what the lessons or curriculum looks like to the young person, then we are not preparing them for the long term in terms of like how to transition successfully out of higher education or even education into institutions of like employment and things like that. So Lillian, I think it should start from the very beginning and it should become part of the culture, because when a student is able to understand what needs to go and be put in place in preparing them for the long run, then they're more involved and they approach, I think, their studies differently. That's just my personal opinion. George, you asked a question to Dr. Samuel, and I think it was during a specific aspect that he was kind of answering. Do you want to unmute yourself and just talk about what the initial steps, what that question was?
Thank you so much, Mayado. My question actually really was on some of the challenges that he had actually kind of highlighted, either in terms of, let's say, when you talk about who actually are we giving the responsibility to really train our youths, really? Because if we do not invest on them, then actually basically what we are actually saying is we are really not kind of putting high expectations in terms of the outputs or the outcomes. So one of the things I really wanted to hear, given his experience, Dr. Samuel, what do you think could be one of those initial things that higher education institutions, me being part of it, that we would need to really do in order to really start to put things on the ground in order to effect the changes that will actually have long-term benefits, both to us, the employers, as well as our graduates at the same time? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I got disconnected at some point. But I think the first thing that we need to do is really to change our mindset. A mindset in the context that we need to move away from just coming to class to dispatch theory to students. And for that to happen, probably we may need to orient our training such that we also become very practical. That our training should also, if you're a business student and teaching accounting, you should be the best, a person who can be able to who can be able to do the trial balance. You have worked somewhere. We need to bring the experience to class, because like I said earlier on, a lot of our lecturers, and I think you probably know that, they do their degrees, they do their masters, then they do their PhD, then we bring them to class. They have no practical experience. And so they cannot even use problem-based learning, because you cannot be a mechanic who is supposed to train others, and you yourself, you cannot repair a car. So we need to really get to a situation whereby when we talk about problem-based learning, for example, the teacher should be able to know the problem and understand the solution, but he's guiding the student to be able to discover that solution, but you let them do it themselves. So in terms of our own country, and especially in Kenya, I think, and competence-based learning is doing that. The government is doing that, starting with the primary school, and eventually to get to the universities. But it's the high time that we also start training our lecturers, our teachers, so that they are prepared for the same, by moving away from too much theory to make them become now the job creators themselves, the problem solver themselves, rather than just reading, a book there by Potter, 5 Forces, of management, of marketing and all that. And yet they themselves probably cannot solve a simple marketing problem. So we will not be able to do that until we ourselves can do it. So we have to do it ourselves. And also, to respond to another question, I think I was also asked about where do we start? I think the teachers, it is the lecturers, the teachers, to do their assignment ahead of time. What I do, for example, in my class, the first day I go there or the second day, I like knowing which students are in my class and they're from which country. The next 1 week, all I do is really to do my own assignment, understanding those countries, so that as I give an example from Kenya, I give another one from Zaire, I give another or from Congo, I give another one from Egypt, depending on the students, so that the students can also feel very as part of the learning in the classroom or in the class. So that's so to summarize, The teachers must do their homework. Let them broaden their spectrum in terms of learning, but also the government should emphasize practical training, whereby the teachers are also involved in industry, and the universities need to partner, like what we are saying, with the industry, so that the teachers can also be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muriithi. Thank you very much, George, for that question. Everyone, we've kind of come to the end of this session, and I think for me, there feels like we only scratched, it feels like we only scratched the surface. There seems to be so much more we can discuss on this. I would like to challenge you with a question personally, like what are some of the things that you can practically do to, change the minds of a young person and almost help them understand the connection between education and, the employment, and challenge you further and to ask you to go and identify 3 or 4 people who you can kind of, open their minds up in order for them to be able to be better prepared for the next aspects of their lives. But for me, I think I've come to the end of this session. We've come to the end of this session. Thank you very much for engaging in this session.